Hi, everybody. Welcome. Welcome and thank you for joining our Sargassum webinar series. We're launching this series to raise awareness about key issues surrounding sargassum. Each webinar will highlight different aspects of sargassum research, management, and its impacts on coastal communities and ecosystems as pictured here on this graphic. The goal of this series is to foster knowledge sharing and regional collaboration across affected areas as we continue to see impacts from sargassum inundation events, especially this summer. My name is Catherine Egan. I'm the Southeast and Caribbean Regional Coordinator for NOAA and one of the hosts of this webinar series. I help co-lead and coordinate for NOAA's Southeast and Caribbean Regional Collaboration Team, also known as SECART. SECART is one of 8 regional collaboration teams across the country, working with both NOAA staff and partners throughout the United States to foster stronger collaborative ties in an effort to improve NOAA's regional capabilities and services. You can find out more information on SECART by following the link that I'll put in the chat in just a moment. Here are the webinars that'll be taking place during this series starting today, and then will happen each week all the way through the first week of August. You can scan the QR code at the top of the slide, and that'll take you to a website where you'll be able to see a description of each webinar and then also register for them all. But I'll also put a link to this website in the chat in just a moment. So with me today is my co-host, Max Brown, who's with NOAA's National Centers for Coastal Ocean Science, or NCOS. Max is just having some audio issues today, so I'll go ahead and introduce him. He's a contractor with NCOS working as a program analyst. He has a background in coastal ecology, molecular biology, and phytoplankton. He started working on sargassum management with us last year and helped put together an assessment of the federal policy landscape around sargassum. Following that, he helped organize and convene a workshop identifying research gaps related to sargassum management. So welcome, Max, and next week you'll definitely be able to hear from him once we get the tech issues sorted out. All right, and with that, I wanted to share a few housekeeping items with you all before we get started. So all participants will be muted during the presentation, but please send us your questions in the chat box to answer at the end. Due to a large number of participants on today's webinar, some of the slides might be delayed as we change them. And finally, we will be recording this webinar and we'll put a link to watch it at a later date on our website and also on our YouTube channel. That is also a link I'll share in the chat in just a second. All right, so with that, let's get started on our presentation for today. Felix, I'm going to go ahead and move screen sharing permissions over to you. And while Felix is getting situated, I will go ahead and introduce him. So our first webinar for the series is titled Sargassum 101, Origins, Biology, and Ecology, and is presented by Dr. Felix Martinez, who's a program manager with NCOS's Competitive Research Program. So as a program manager, Dr. Felix Martinez develops, implements, and administers a multi-million-dollar portfolio of extramural research programs addressing issues impacting the nation's coastal and ocean ecosystems. His responsibilities include developing and overseeing research and outreach activities related to all phases of the federal grants process. These phases include identifying research priorities, developing program announcements, conducting peer review processes, communicating funding recommendations to senior management, leading program implementation, and then overseeing the monitoring and evaluation of awarded funds. He also responds to congressional inquiries regarding the activities and funding of these programs. And finally, he is also the lead for the Prevention, Control, and Mitigation Group of the Harmful Algal Blooms Program. Felix, welcome. We can see your slides, so I'll go ahead and pass it off to you.
Thank you, Catherine. Hi, and thank you for attending this presentation. This is the first of a series of 5 webinars. They're going to be discussing sargasso as an environmental issue that has increasingly become a hot topic for management agencies. My goal today is to provide a quick overview of what is sargasso, where does it come from, what is its ecological role, what kind of impacts does it have, and then wrap it all up with a few thoughts as we move forward. So why do we care about sargasso? Sargasso is a large brown macroalgae that has 2 distinct forms. They can be found attached to the substrate like other marine plants and algae, but it also can be found floating in the open waters where they form large mats. So why is this important? Sargasso has been long known for the ecological role it plays creating a habitat in the open ocean. Today, it has become even more important because economic impact has shifted from a positive one due to its role in sustaining commercial and recreational fisheries to a negative one due to its negative effects on tourism, coastal communities, and including those very same fisheries they have helped sustain. Now, let's explore Sargasso a little bit further. Sargasso, or more formally Sargassum by its Latin genus name, is a genus in the brown algae family that contains over 300 species worldwide. However, only two are known to be exclusively pelagic, and that will be Sargassum natans and Sargassum fluitans. These two species are ubiquitously found in an area of the North Atlantic called, of course, the Sargasso Sea, and it's the only sea that's not bound by any land formation, as it's entirely bounded by the North Atlantic Gyre, and it's typically a region of calm waters, which is suitable for the growth of Sargasso. Historically, it was the primary location for live concentrations with periodical releases of small mats that would then regularly drift into the Caribbean region. And growing up in Puerto Rico, I remember encountering mats of Sargasso on the beach every so often and never think of it, as really a big deal. However, in 2011, things seem to change dramatically, and so this is a new phenomenon that's completely different from the Sargasso Sea. Since then, large blooms of Sargasso have appeared in the tropical Atlantic, the Caribbean Sea, and the Gulf. There's even been a new area now designated as a point of regime for Sargasso known as the Great Atlantic Sargassum Belt that can range from West Africa all the way to Brazil. In their densities are shining those of the Sargasso Sea and have been leading to large mats that are impacting the greater Caribbean. So what actually is Sargasso? As we say, it's a macroalgae that people often refer to as seaweed. It's very plant-like with a formal stem structure and leaf-like blades. Benthic species have a holdfast, which they attach to the bottom, but the more distinct feature is their air or gas bladders that help them float. Sargasso can tolerate a wide range of temperatures and typical ocean salinities. They do need a lot of light, and their growth is mostly limited by the nutrient availability. This last point is an important one to keep in mind. I already mentioned the two distinct forms, benthic and pelagic. The benthic are found attached to hard substrates in shallow waters and reproduce sexually. The pelagic forms are naturally free-floating, reproduce asexually by fragmentation, and it's believed from genetic studies that pelagic Sargasso evolved from benthic ancestors. The gas bladders, or pneumatocysts, are a key feature of the Sargasso species, but so is their ability to grow fast when light and nutrients are abundant and the temperature is optimal. Combine this to Sargasso reproduction by fragmentation, and you have the key for their ability to propagate vast and wide. Sargasso, as most algae and plants, use photosynthesis to grow. They contain both chlorophyll A and C and accessory pigments such as glucoxanthin, which gives Sargasso its brown color. Since they're able to absorb the nutrients directly from the water, we can assume that nutrient availability can and does play a major factor in the size of the mats. I've already covered the fact that pelagic Sargasso reproduces by fragmentation, but the main point of this slide is the fact that each and every fragment can develop into a new independent mat, add their ability to rapid growth, and it's easy to then understand why Sargassum Inundation Events have exploded since 2011. Let's now switch to why Sargasso is important from an ecological viewpoint. Sargasso mats are sometimes compared to a rainforest. They create a three-dimensional environment in the open ocean that in turn helps provide shelter, food, and breeding grounds to many other marine species. So much so that they're officially recognized as essential fish habitat for important commercial and recreational fish species, as well as critical habitat for several endangered and threatened marine species. There's a great variety of associated fauna associated with Sargasso mats, including fish, crustaceans, sea turtles, and invertebrates such as hydroids, bryozoans, and nudibranchs. Sargasso also serves as a substrate for epiphytes and microbial communities. The latter, both bacterial and fungal, are thought to play a role in nutrient cycling and decomposition in the life cycle of Sargasso mats. The key point of this slide is to remind me to emphasize that Sargasso is indeed an important part, actually the base of a unique marine food web. Many species graze on it directly, while many others use it for shelter or feeding on the smaller organisms that live directly on the Sargasso or just happen to float nearby. When mats die and decay on open water, they sink and bring nutrients to deep waters. But just as important, when it lands on shore, Sargasso still plays an important ecological role. It brings nutrients from the ocean to sandy shores where it helps feed a whole new set of organisms. So how does Sargasso get around? Ocean currents and wind are the main factors determining the distribution of Sargasso. Major currents can both keep it in place, as in the Sargasso Sea, but also eddies and wind-driven current shifts can carry it to places beyond their origin. Mats reaching areas where water temperatures are optimal and nutrients are abundant will then play a role in sustaining or even expanding the amount of sargassum. This is what is believed to be the origin of what is now referred to as the Great Atlantic Sargassum Belt. Temporary changes in circulation patterns in the Atlantic Gyre led to mats of Sargasso reaching areas where nutrient inputs from major rivers and warm ocean temperatures create a perfect growing nursery. It is safe to hypothesize that a combination of natural and anthropogenic factors came together to create the large Sargassum Inundation Events that we're seeing today. Sargasso in this new belt area is itself subject to seasonal fluctuations. Mats typically form in the late winter and early spring, then move west where they peak in extent and size during the summer. The Sargasso belt has been seen expanding thousands of kilometers, but its size and intensity does tend to vary from year to year. So we have clearly explored earlier the key positive role that Sargasso plays ecologically. Let's now briefly look at its negative impacts. Bleaching of sargassum is something that has been occurring since time immemorial. However, its impacts are positive or negative depending on the amount that arrives at any one time. Prior to the formation of the Sargasso Belt, inundation events were small, did not necessarily warrant a response, unless, of course, in front of a popular hotel, and mostly just contributed a food source for crabs and shorebirds. Now, every so often, there will be larger events that would actually require removal. However, this could be easily done either manually or with small mechanized equipment. Again, growing up in Puerto Rico, I can attest that these relatively large events were few and far between. Post 2011, things are now quite the opposite. Extreme large inundation events are commonplace and they always require a major cleanup operation. The environmental impacts are also quite large. Coastal ecosystem can become smothered, blocked by sunlight and anoxia due to the composition of sargasso. Blocked sunlight and anoxia due to the composition of sargasso can degrade seagrass beds, coral reefs, and mangrove forests ecosystems and lead to the death of associated flora and fauna. Ultimately, unstable ecosystems and even the loss of sand due to removal of oceans can lead to ultimately unstable ecosystem, even the loss of the sand due to the removal operations can then lead to coastal erosion. The impacts do not end with just the environment. Frequent large inundation events also have major economic impacts. The unsightly appearance of the decaying mats and their blocking of beach access are major detriments to tourism and recreation. Fouling of engines and impeding water access to shore-based fishing boats has a major impact to artisanal fisheries, commonplace in the Greater Caribbean and West Africa areas. Mats can even impact critical coastal-based infrastructure, such as desalination and power plant intakes, as was the case recently in the U.S. Virgin Islands and Puerto Rico, respectively. Luckily, people have not been just sitting idle in the face of the Sargasso issue. There are several ongoing and developing efforts to monitor and forecast inundation events using satellites, ocean circulation models, and citizen science. Here's an example of just 3 of these available products. Do note that I'm not using any images in this case, as I don't want to appear to endorse any particular product. People also have not been sitting idle when it comes to responding. Beach cleanups have unfortunately become a common occurrence. Removal is either done manually or by machinery if available and suitable. The beach cleanup approach does have some major challenges. It is costly because of its labor intensive, even when using machines, and it also causes environmental impacts of its own, from beach erosion to disrupting nesting turtles. Also from landfill capacity to leaching chemicals. But most important, It's merely a response and does not address the root cause of the inundation event in the first place. On-water collection is also becoming a common approach. Methods vary, but they all include some form of containment device to keep the sargasso from reaching the shore and some specialized collection vessel to remove the sargasso from the water. Now, on-water collection also has its challenges. First is the large scale of the mats. To effectively remove the sargasso, we need large vessels and equipment, which comes with high price tag and operational costs. In, if indeed we are able to spin up water collection operations, then we run into the problem of what to do with it. Both the, but the most important challenge is that any water collection will need to take into account the potential harm to the marine life that's associated to the sargasso. Effective collection, whether on land or on water, does not address the issue of disposal. Although in most cases, the sargasso is ending in trash dumps, there are many groups working on developing and implementing uses for sargasso. These include processing sargasso into agricultural products such as fertilizer, compost, and as animal feed supplements. There's also ongoing efforts to find ways to turn sargasso into biofuel and other biomaterials such as plastic, fabrics, and even synthetic leather. And there's always the potential for its use in development for pharmaceutical products. So after this whirlwind overview of Sargasso issue, I would like to leave you with some parting thoughts. Sargasso is indeed a fascinating and ecologically important organism. However, the massive blooms that we now have are becoming an environmental and socioeconomic challenge that cannot be ignored. But in order to develop a proper and effective management strategy, we need to take into account Sargasso's unique biology and ecology, and this will only be accomplished through innovation and collaboration. What the future holds can never be known, but we can guess that these large blooms are likely to continue and that we may not yet know how large the sargasso belt can get. Management strategies are forthcoming as agencies are already trying to tackle the issue. Although we know enough to start developing these strategies, there's still some research that needs to be that is needed to fully understand the bloom drivers and the impacts. And finally, the Sargasso issue will require international collaboration if we're going to tackle it in an effective and environmentally responsible manner. Well, so again, thank you so much for your attention. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. And I guess we open now the floor to any questions.
Thank you so much, Felix. That was a really wonderful overview. And then for folks who are on the line, Felix basically is setting the stage for what is going to happen for the rest of the webinar series. So each week we'll explore various topics leading up from understanding of the Greater Atlantic Sargassum Belt, which is next week's webinar, all the way through what are the uses of sargassum once it's harvested. So I hope you can join and hear a little bit more of a deeper dive into each of those topics. So if you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the questions box up in the upper left-hand corner now. We did have a question that came in for you, Felix. This person asks, what concerns are there for human exposure to sargassum on the shore or near shore from a dermal or respiratory perspective? Also, are there any concerns related to chain, biomagnification, or other ingestion pathways?
Yes, those are great concerns. I mean, and there is some knowledge already that the decomposition releases hydrogen sulfide that leads to foul smell that in itself may not necessarily be toxic to humans. It just sort of doesn't allow for a great experience at the beach if it stinks. But there's been reports of people that are sensitive to running into and brushing against sargasso when it's floating in the water, and they still try to go in and try to enjoy the. Some people try to just go through the sargasso mat if it's not too big to just sort of go to where the water is open, and some of them have had skin reactions, so that is definitely something of a concern. And there's also been reports of when the sargassum accumulates that it may lead to higher concentrations of some things that could be noxious, just like Vibrio. There's a paper came out not long ago saying that for the potential for the Vibrio to be present in the Sargassum mat. So yeah, so the people tend to ignore it and just try to go in the water. It's always going to be caution to when you do that, that there's a potential and these things that we're trying to address. And it goes to my my assertion to the fact that we'd rather focus on dealing with this thing before it gets to the shore. One, because it'll probably be easier to handle, but also eliminates all those added issues that come once it accumulates on the shore.
Thank you, Felix. We had another question that came in. Can you elaborate more on the chemical challenges of using sargassum for agriculture or composting purposes? And this person is specifically referencing the high levels of arsenic found in sargassum.
Yes, that's a great question. And I recently learned in a workshop that I attended that was hosted in the Dominican Republic that there are companies that have already found ways to use bacteria to deal with that issue of chemicals in the sargassum. And they've been able to render it usable for agriculture as a fertilizer. And they already are engaging with farms in Mexico to provide it as a source of fertilizer. So it's just a mean of being able to come up with ways to clean it up in the post processing before it can then be repurposed. So it's a great concern.
Thanks, Felix. And for those who have the time and want to learn more about sargassum, again, every week we'll be exploring kind of a new phase of the sargassum life cycle from sea to shore. And our very last one will be about the uses of sargassum. That'll be August 7th at 1 p.m. So definitely register for that if you're looking to hear a little bit more. And I imagine they'll address the kind of heavy metals, arsenic aspect of sargassum then in depth. Another question came in for you, Felix. This person asks, what changed in 2011? What is significant about 2011 and the increase in sargassum?
So that's been, a fairly debated question. Some people were sort of blaming nutrient loadings from the discharge of the major rivers into the central Atlantic. But some of us would have argued that well, those rivers have been discharging nutrients for much longer than that, since before 2011, and there seems to be now some evidence suggesting that there was an event in 2009, 2010 that may have allowed for a patch to escape the gyre. And then, and that was in the map that I posted, it came from the paper, uh, where this sort of patch sort of landed off the northwest coast of Africa. And then the current that goes along the coast there brought it down to this area, which was basically just perfectly suited for sargassum. Warm temperatures, lots of sunlight, lots of nutrients, and there's circulation patterns in there that tends to, create a perfect area for it to grow, and then the westerly winds then just sort of uh, wait, easterly winds, yeah, easterly, uh, then bring it over, push it over to the Caribbean area. So it seems that I don't know whether there's continued seeding from the Sargasso, or is it just that the fluctuations come from uh, changes itself in the area. The Sargassum belt, in terms of like, why does it vary from year to year? Some years seems to be worse than others. Sometimes, we have a huge concentration, but then the winds are not, good enough. Or maybe it turns out that it ends up going to other places, so that years that are good for the U.S. islands, both Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands, are the bad years for Mexico, and vice versa.
Thanks so much, Felix. We actually have a ton of questions about that kind of year change, 2011. So I hope that addresses what a lot of folks are saying. And once Felix is answering our next question, I will go ahead and drop a link to that paper that just came out that explains what happened and what Felix
I
just
believe that,
mentioned now.
Catherine, there's actually two papers. There's one that came out in 2020, and then there's this new one. And I think one speculated that that was a possibility, and this new one, what he did is model it. and sort of basically let credence to the original hypotheses. That's the way I think it went. I'm not 100% sure. If Frank is on the audience today, he can certainly put something on the chat and let us know.
Yeah, sounds good. Okay, I'll definitely drop the modeling paper then in the chat here.
Okay, yeah.
Um, we have somebody from DRNA in Puerto Rico asking, does NOAA collect any data on heavy metals or other contaminants that are present in sargassum?
Yes, in fact, some colleagues of mine in ANCOS, in one of the analytical labs, they have some projects in which they've been looking into it. It's sort of been more of out of their own interest and a official NOAA project to look into it. But that's one of the many efforts of people that are looking into what are the chemicals present and which ones will be of concern. So there's some ongoing efforts to try to quantify that.
Is that data made available anywhere, Felix?
I don't know the state of the project, but if someone wants to, shoot me an email with the request, I'll try to find a linkage to at least on the NOAA site.
Thank you. Yep, and Felix's email is here on the screen if you want to reach out. We'll go ahead and go through a couple of more questions. We have so many questions, Felix, which is great. I'm so happy that everybody
I'm glad I
here
ended it
is here
quickly, so
today.
that way we have the rest of the hour for questions.
If you're feeling up to it, for sure. This was a really good one. Somebody asked, to what extent is Saharan dust impacting the growth of sargassum compared with, say, nutrient runoff from rivers?
I don't know myself the answer to that question, but I would venture to guess that it's just one more contributing factor. I mean, Sahara dust sort of has been historically known that it leads to a lot of fertilizing capabilities in terms of like when it settles on the branches of trees in the Amazon, that's what leads to a lot of epiphytes being able to grow. So again, it's one of those things that I don't think is the cause, but it certainly is something that contributes to the success of sargassum in this new area. It could also help explain some of the shifts in terms of like seasonality, like one year where the dust may be worse, that may lead to, I don't know, someone may have looked into that, but that's a possibility.
Thanks, Felix. This is another really great question too. Well, they first they apologize if this was missed earlier on in the presentation, but they're asking, what is the ecological importance of sargassum once it has made landfall?
So when he makes landfall in small quantities, it's something that when he reaches the shore, you'd see a lot of like shorebirds picking at it, anything that may be growing on it, any little crabs that typically are attached to it. So it constitutes a food source. Also, as it degrades on particularly in sand dune ecosystems where there's not a lot of like nutrients themselves, there's no soil because it's sand. So that helps bring some nutrients into those ecosystems as well. So it's not the main contributor to nutrients necessarily, but it certainly does play a role in terms of like contributing nutrients to those coastal ecosystems. And that's what the reason why I brought that up is like sort of my concern that, and I didn't mention it in the talk, but I see that sargassum presents the great conundrum because on the one hand, we see it as an essential fish habitat, critical habitat for some species, but now that there's a lot of it, we see it as one of those like obnoxious harmful algal blooms, right? And but then it depends on where it's at and how much of there is to go from one to the other, and we don't know where that fine line resides yet. So I want to make sure that we keep it in mind that we don't want to take all the sargassum out of the sea. we need to find some type of balance as to like where, like how much of it we can keep out there so that the beaches become more of that thing that I remember of the past than what is happening now.
Thank you, Felix. Um, I think this one is an important question and may be helpful to some of our audience members that are not all too familiar with sargassum in general. But could you describe the differences between sargassum and red tide?
So good question, and I wasn't expecting it. So red tide particularly the one in Florida, what we know is that there's a area offshore of the northwest coast of Florida that every so often um, Carenia brevis, which is the dinoflagellate that leads to the red tide, um, starts blooming, and then depending on the size of it, currents can bring it up closer to the shore, and then once it gets there, again reaches conditions where you have warm water with a lot of nutrients, and then they bloom in such amount of concentrations that then they lead to all kinds of other issues, particularly because it produces a toxin called brevetoxin. So you can lead to fish kills. When the algal cells, die, then it leads to, hypoxia or anoxia that then has other, um, and that's a macroalgae. And typically, there's very little of it. It's only when it blooms periodically that it becomes an issue. On the flip side, sargassum, it's something that by its very nature blooms. So it's not harmful algal bloom. It's actually a good algal bloom because it's formed those like huge mats up in the open ocean that are three-dimensional and act as nursery to a whole bunch of commercial fish species. And, it also attracts predators to feed of it. So, they can be used recreationally, for fishing, but it's a nursery for juvenile sea turtles. So these blooms are actually good. They only become bad when they get to shore, and then there's such an amount that they need to be removed. And when in the removal process, it can lead to erosion because sand gets taken out. I mean, someone presented not recently and have pictures of these beautiful sandy beaches in the landfill in one of the Virgin Islands because they're putting all the sand there. So it's only in that case that it becomes an issue.
Thank you so much, Felix. Before I move on to the next question, I am getting a lot of questions about whether the slides can be shared. We are recording this and we will make the recording available. GoToWebinar, the platform we're using, will send out an automatic email to everybody who registered for this event, and it'll have a link to the recording, and that'll go out 24 hours after this goes out. So just wanted to kind of put that out there for everybody. Felix had another question come in. We have a lot of questions coming in about ways to remove sargassum from beaches, particularly like what are safe ways of removing sargassum from beaches to protect the environment and people?
I mean, I guess one of the biggest complaints that I heard at the very beginning, particularly from the hotel sector, is that the amounts are so big that, like you're saying, like in the past, they could send out a couple people with some pitchforks and buckets. Maybe they'll have a small tractor with a raker that could, very, gingerly go over the shore and then sort of dig it up. And there's some companies that actually sell small collectors that some of them can even do it automatically. And those have minimal disruption to the beach, but in some cases the amount is just so much that you have to then go to the heavy equipment, and that becomes a lot trickier. And it's almost impossible to like sort of take it out without taking out some of the sand. And then you have to keep in mind that there's like natural erosion processes that are constantly, shifting the sand. So some of these beaches actually rely on sand renourishment every so often. So it kind of, doesn't make sense to pay to put the sand there and then have to pay to take it out, when you're trying to remove sargassum. And some of those cases, what they were asking was whether it would be possible to interdict it or so that it could be moved, like mats could be moved to another beach in which, like, one, it was not sandy and maybe it was a easier way to remove it, or if it was sandy, it's one that naturally gets a lot of sand, so the removal would not be as impactful. So these are things that we still need to sort of really think about, and it goes back again to my idea that our focus should be on water collection and interdiction, so that we just avoid the beach size, all the beach issues altogether.
Thanks, Felix. Let's do just a couple more questions because I do, again, want to just let you all know that a lot of what you're asking will be addressed in the coming weeks through this whole webinar series. Again, each week we'll dive a little bit deeper into a particular topic around sargassum. And so I definitely encourage you all to please register for those webinars and come ask some of our other experts here in the coming weeks as well. But I do love the enthusiasm and all of the questions that are coming in today. So thank you, everybody. You can also follow up with Felix too. Again, his email is here on the screen. But let's go ahead and just do a few more and then we'll go ahead and close out the webinar. Felix, I think you kind of addressed this one a little bit, but it's a different ask here. So this is actually a professor from the University of Puerto Rico, Aguadilla. What do you think about using sargassum as a plant fertilizer and aggregate in sand dune restoration projects? Should we be concerned with the heavy metal content of this material in that setting?
That's an interesting question because I have seen pictures of people that have done it, and what they've done is just sort of pile it up into the upper end, parts of the beach, so that just to sort of provide that stabilizing. And I don't know, and this is one of those things that we need to get a better understanding from the regulating agencies as to what can and cannot be done, because there certainly will be a concern. Now, if there is no aquifer necessarily that will be impacted, I can imagine that leaching of this material in that beach area might be of a concern. Because that's where, so as long as you not put it in agricultural fields directly, there should be no issue with that. So I think the biggest concern would be if you're piling it up along the shoreline and it's right on top of potential aquifer from which water is drawn, then you could lead to some chemical leaching. So again, it's one of the things that it's definitely an option. I've seen pictures of people doing it. I don't know if they have addressed that question, but it will probably have to be taken on a case by case basis depending on where you're doing it.
Thanks so much, Felix. Yeah, for the person that asked that question, again, please tune into our August 7th webinar about uses of sargassum. I think that may be a good time to ask those experts. Okay, let's do one more question. I'm kind of consolidating a couple of other questions here. This person asks, can you address generally how the greater quantities of offshore sargassum may be impacting fisheries, either in a good or a bad way?
So yeah, that's a good one too, because I didn't really thought about it until I heard a fisherman talk about it in the workshop that we held a few weeks ago. That sometimes the mats are so large that you can't go across them and force your way through because one is too thick and two your motor would just not handle it. It will get all fouled up. So they if they want to move from one place to another that normally will be like quick boat trip may take a lot longer time just to go around these mats that can be miles long. So that's definitely an impact. And I've also heard someone comment that typically the floating mats, they act as aggregator devices, quote unquote, or fats, where fish like to congregate, but sometimes they're so big that they become counterproductive. And some people have sort of started noticing, a decrease in the mahi-mahi fishery, where places where normally you would be able to find them, they're just not there anymore. And again, I think it's one of those things that if a mat it's too dense, then it could start uh, losing its usefulness to some of the species. Like if you're a juvenile sea turtle and you had to try to go through 3 feet of dense sargassum to even take a breath, you might not be able to do it. So that uh, the larger mats then in the middle may become completely sort of counterproductive.
Thanks so much, Felix. Okay, I think we're going to go ahead and wrap up there. If you have questions, feel free to reach out to Felix. Let me also put our generic email here in the chat box for you all. Yeah, I just want to thank everybody so much for being here today and participating in the first part of our webinar series. And thank you all again for your thoughtful questions this afternoon as well. Our next webinar is next week. It's July 16th at 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, sorry, Eastern Daylight Time. Let me go ahead and put the registration link in for you. So this webinar will be discussing tracking the drift and origin of the Great Atlantic Sargassum Belt. So a big focus on sargassum at sea next week. In the chat, you'll also find a link to our website that has all of the webinars if you want to register for any of the future ones thereafter. Like I said at the top of the webinar today, we'll be covering a different topic every week all the way through the first week of August. So I hope you can join for all of them. So, and with that, thanks so much for your presentation today, Felix. We really appreciate you being here. And thank you, Max, for co-hosting and co-organizing this series as well. So thank you, everybody.
Okay, thank you, everyone.